What if what you think is true is actually just a trick of the mind? As you drift asleep, we'll explore the curious topic of mental shortcuts, how they can help us make quick decisions, but come at a cost in terms of accuracy. So I invite you to join me as you relax and begin to absorb yourself into a reverie of today's topic. In 1974, psychologists Amos Tversky and Kahneman wrote a paper, Judgment Under Uncertainty, Heuristics and Biases, explaining how people rely on mental shortcuts, known as heuristics, to make judgments about uncertain events, like predicting outcomes, estimating probabilities, or evaluating evidence. However, although this can help us to make quick decisions, simplifying potentially complex or uncertain situations, it comes with a downside. Those quick decisions can lead to systematic errors in judgment and reasoning. There were three main heuristics identified: representative heuristic, availability heuristic, and adjustment and anchoring heuristic. Imagine you're at a dinner party. As you walk around that party, you notice the different individuals who've attended. Perhaps you see someone sat alone in an armchair, looking down towards the ground, barely moving. Maybe someone else is talking with a small group, holding a drink in their hand, leaning back as they laugh in a very over-the-top, overt way at something being said. Another person is sitting on a stool in the kitchen, talking softly while making good eye contact with a person who's leaning in, absorbed in what they're saying. Without any conscious thought, you will have made judgments about these different characters. If you were asked to respond to some questions about each of those people, you would most likely draw upon biases to inform your opinions. If I asked whether the person chatting in the kitchen was a doctor or a waiter, or whether the person sitting in the armchair was happily married, or which of these people struggles with social anxiety, non-consciously, your brain would consider with each individual what the probability is that that individual has that profession, or seems like they would be happily married, or appears to struggle with social anxiety. There are different types of representative heuristics. You may wonder what the chances are that object or person A belongs to class B. Like, does this person seem more like they could be a doctor or waiter? Or perhaps you're curious about whether a certain event was because of some process. Maybe you accidentally drop a glass in the kitchen moments before the person starts laughing, and you wonder whether they're laughing because you dropped the glass. Or perhaps you question whether a certain process would generate a specific event, like perhaps assuming that the person sitting alone in the chair with their head down may be anxious, and if you go over, sit with them and talk to them, you'll be able to help them feel more comfortable. When people rely on the representative heuristic, if they feel the probability that one thing is representative of the other is high, then they're likely to conclude that to be the case. Likewise, if they feel the probability is low, then they'll conclude it's unlikely. For example, you look at the person in the kitchen and you see they're smartly dressed and appear calm and confident, perhaps with an expensive watch visible. You feel that they're probably a doctor, because the traits you observed, you feel, are representative of a stereotype of a doctor having a high income and being calm to manage stressful situations. Maybe when you drop the glass and hear the laughing, you've seen people laugh at similar situations in the past and perhaps have even experienced this yourself. So it unconsciously feels natural to assume the person laughed because you dropped the glass. Conversely, perhaps it seems unlikely that dropping the glass made the person sitting in the armchair unflinchingly still and quiet. And perhaps you have experienced being anxious yourself at a social gathering and found it to be helpful having someone calmly approach and talk with you. So you assume this seems like a highly probable likelihood if you sit and talk with the person in that chair. This approach to judgment of probability can be flawed, leading to errors because you're making a judgment based on similarity or representativeness, while failing to consider other information which could help you develop a better judgment of probability. It's natural and helpful in certain situations where you need to think quickly, where fast thinking and action takes priority over accuracy. And it makes sense that at times our ancestors used this thinking to try to gain some certainty and understanding in an uncertain world. Our distant ancestors hearing a rustling bush and running away because a big cat could be about to leap out is more likely to save their life than walking towards the bush to explore why it's rustling and discovering that it is actually a big cat about to leap out at them. Likewise, when our ancestors lived in small communities, it was perhaps more sensible, when seeing a group of strangers approaching, to worry that they may be about to invade. Or during a drought, perhaps they performed a specific ritual to make the rains pour. However, often mistakes are made. The decisions haven't been made considering prior probability or general frequency. For example, How often at a party do people laugh during conversations? What are the chances at any given moment during a party that someone would be laughing? And what are the odds that this could be happening with at least one person, just at the moment that a glass smashes on the floor? What are the chances of encountering someone who's a doctor versus someone who works as a waiter? How many more people work as waiters compared to doctors? This person may look a lot more like a doctor than a waiter, and so the chances are, if you make your decision based on representativeness, you won't consider that statistically they're more likely to be a waiter. In a 1973 article by the same authors, they carried out an experiment where subjects were shown personality descriptions of a number of different people. They were told that these people had been randomly selected from a group of 100 engineers and lawyers. The subjects were asked to read each personality description and decide whether the individual was a lawyer or an engineer. There were different conditions for the experiment. In one condition, subjects were told that the group consisted of 70 engineers and 30 lawyers. In another condition, they were told the opposite, that the group consisted of 30 engineers and 70 lawyers. The odds should have meant that subjects felt more of the descriptions in the first group were descriptions of engineers, and more of the descriptions given in the second group were descriptions of lawyers. Curiously, both groups of subjects reported the same probability judgments. They appeared to base their judgments on how much the descriptions fit the two stereotypes, with very little consideration to prior probabilities. However, when subjects were asked to judge whether an unknown individual was likely an engineer or lawyer, and they weren't given any personality profile for those random unknown individuals, they made decisions based on the prior probabilities. The conclusion was that people respond differently when given no evidence and when given worthless evidence. When no specific evidence is given, prior probabilities are properly utilized. When worthless evidence is given, prior probabilities are ignored. There are many times when people are given inaccurate or worthless evidence, which then encourages an ignoring of prior probabilities, and the result of inaccurate judgments, which develop from within with the feeling and confidence that they are likely accurate, not realizing that they have just given a judgment based on representative heuristic. It's also common to have a misconception of chance, where we see patterns in randomness, especially on a small local scale, that makes us think something isn't random. Like, if there are 5 coin tosses and 4 of them come up heads, we can think that this wasn't random. Or thinking that certain patterns are less random than other patterns, like if 4 heads followed by 4 tails were tossed, which would be seen as a less likely sequence than, say, heads, tails, heads, tails, tails, heads, tails, heads. The gambler's fallacy comes from this, where perhaps a gambler, observing a run of red on a roulette wheel, and so is convinced that black is now more likely, when actually each turn is independent of what came before, and so for every turn there remains as much chance of that turn being red or black, regardless of whether the last 10 turns have been red. This same mindset can impact researchers' interpretations of research, where they observe what seems to be a statistically significant pattern in a small sample size and extrapolate that it's representative of the wider population, especially if the result aligns with prior biases, expectations, and beliefs. For example, if research on 4 students found that 3 out of 4 of those students passed their exams after engaging in mental rehearsal of successfully passing their exams with no study required, then this could seem like a statistically significant pattern. But it was a very small sample size, and there could be many other reasons for this outcome, including just chance. The researchers might conclude that this is evidence that you don't need to study, just use mental rehearsal, but they haven't compared it with a control group, and the sample size was very small. It's studies like this which often end up not being replicable. Sometimes many small studies get similar outcomes, which point tentatively to an idea being worth investigating further with a larger study. But it's common, once the study is scaled up to hundreds of participants, for effects on a local level to fade away, which increases scientists' confidence in the research findings. Another area where people use a representative heuristic to make judgments is predicting the future not based on data. If a description is given of a company and the wording is favourable to the company, implying the company is successful, then predictions will follow that the company is likely going to be successful in the future. Conversely, if the description is of the company's challenges, predictions will often be that the company isn't going to be successful in the future. And if the description is of a company that's doing okay, then the prediction might be that the company will likely continue to make steady profit, maintaining its course. This kind of information is interesting to think about when thinking about companies who are looking for investment. How that company is perceived by the potential investors may have more impact on whether it gets that investment than on the actual and perhaps complicated figures. Many descriptions could be equally true, just focusing on different aspects and playing some areas down. For example, maybe there's a narrative played by the media that there are disagreements with those running the company, or that the company has been struggling and so is looking for investment to try to keep it afloat, and potential investors hear of this and it shapes their perspective. Perhaps in a meeting with potential investors, the company promotes their wins, like how many sales they made, how wide their reach is, how a certain item was the most popular item in its category of the year. None of this reveals whether the company is likely to do well in the future, but this positive spin could shape investors' decision-making. A perhaps more real-world example can be when teachers are asked to predict students' future outcomes based on a single test, and they conclude that certain students wouldn't do well in university, and other students will likely not do well in work, or may only be capable of a specific type of work, or are unlikely to get certain grades and so unlikely to be good or successful in those areas. In school, I failed English language, English literature, maths, business studies, and many other subjects. My first time taking my GCSE exams, the only subject I got a C or above in was science. Every other subject was D down to fail. I retook English language and maths because I was told it's a requirement of all jobs that you have at least 3 GCSEs at grade C or above, and that these must include English language, maths and science. In my retakes, I got a C for English language and for maths. The interesting thing is that my future was being discussed based on representative heuristics and insensitivity to predictability. I was told I wasn't good at these subjects I failed, even those I scraped by at a second sitting. I was told I wasn't good at. The expectation was that I wouldn't be successful in areas focusing heavily on certain subjects, and yet I've written multiple books and have sold over 150,000 books. I've run my own business for decades, and for the last decade made much of my living from creating stories. All this despite failing business studies and English literature and barely scraping into a C with English language. So a future prediction made based on a snapshot of my life and on my ability or lack of ability to complete exams and uninteresting coursework was the wrong information to focus on when working out my potential path and future success. Many people can probably relate to this, whether as parents in relation to how teachers discuss their children's future potential, or as individuals who share a similar experience, where aspects of the school environment just weren't a great fit, and maybe you just weren't that good at exams for some reason. Like perhaps struggling to understand questions, or not being able to complete exams fast enough, or finding the content too dry and uninteresting, and so struggling to connect with it. And then having people tell you what your future holds. another area which can relate to all of us, but which is often present at first when we're children, is people's unawareness of regression toward the mean, instead making decisions based on representative heuristic. Regression toward the mean means that extreme things or outliers, whether very good or very bad, tend to be followed by something more average. So, if a child has a very bad tantrum over perhaps being told they can't play with a specific toy, then the next time they're told they can't play with a specific toy, they may not have a tantrum, or at least will be likely to react in a more expected way to being told that news. Conversely, if a child tidies their bedroom when asked, and this is unusual for that child, then when asked in the future, they're likely to respond as usual. In school, if a child does incredibly well on a test, they're likely not to do so well on the next test. If a child does incredibly poorly on a test, they're likely to do better on the next test. What can happen, though, is that perhaps the parent punishes their child for the tantrum. Then the next time a similar situation occurs and the child doesn't have a tantrum, they think it's because they punished their child. So they assume punishments work, which isn't a position supported by research. Whereas a parent rewarding their child for tidying their bedroom, then the next time the child doesn't tidy their room, the parent concludes that rewards don't work, which also isn't a position supported by research. So in both situations, the parent's future behaviour to punish poor behaviour and not to reward positive behaviour, based on them making a faulty causal link, leads to the parent parenting in a less effective way over time, because they were unaware of regression toward the mean. This regression toward the mean happens in various areas of life, where it's common to make judgments based on representative heuristic. Perhaps someone starts a business and it quickly becomes a success. They may conclude that it's easy to start businesses. They may expect equally as quick and easy success with their next business venture, but find that this only has average success, so they could conclude it was a failure, or that it didn't do so well due to something they did or didn't do. The first business, perhaps they attribute its success to something specific they did, even though in reality there is no causal link. Likewise, if a business failed, they may incorrectly attribute that outcome to something they did or didn't do, and when the next business does better, they may conclude that it was because they learned from what they did with the first business and did certain things different the second time, not recognizing that this was just regression toward the mean. That isn't to say we can't do things or fail to do things which have an impact on the success we have or don't have. But it's also important to consider regression toward the mean. A commonly discussed phenomenon is that books by successful people sharing their secret to success are self-selecting. The people who do exactly what is recommended in those people's books, who fail to be highly successful, don't write books about their experience with those same ideas. Availability heuristic is where people make judgments based on the ease with which they can recall certain information. So the information potentially available to them off the top of their head. So if someone generally thinks negatively about things, perhaps when they think about approaching someone to ask them out on a date, they instantly recall failures, whether these are their own failures or perhaps failures of others, perhaps recently in their life, and so they see the chances of this going successfully as slim. Or perhaps they think positively about things and may think it always works out on TV and assume they too will be successful. The more information about something someone's aware of, the better their judgment could be. However, there are factors which can make the person biased in their judgments. There can be biases due to the retrievability of instances where one class of information stands out more than another. For example, perhaps you're very aware of certain information because it's always on the news, yet other information which is equally or perhaps even more frequent is rarely mentioned. So you make a judgment based on that readily available information. This can make people think air travel is more dangerous than it is. Or if someone local wins the lottery, and this is all over the media, it can make it seem like winning is more likely. Or if crime is being frequently reported, it can make it seem like there is more crime than there actually is. And in the days of social media, perhaps you frequently see people with seemingly perfect lives and assume that is more the norm, but then feel like you're the one who's different because everyone else seems to be getting married, settling down, in happy relationships, always on holiday, don't seem to be struggling with mental health challenges, are more liked. Salience and recency can also impact retrievability of instances. Salience is how noticeable, important, or prominent something is. For example, if you perhaps visit somewhere on holiday and a few people do good deeds and are polite to you, this happens directly to you, so you're more likely to imbue this with extra importance or weight, and so more likely to judge that people in that place are kind and friendly people. If you were directly the victim of a crime, you're more likely to perceive that crime is higher in that area, even if this is factually inaccurate. Experiencing something firsthand is going to give greater impact than reading about it, and is likely to require fewer repetitions for it to have high salience. It might be that you would need to repeatedly see news articles about something, or very emotive articles to really pay attention to them to form a judgment, whereas it may only take a single personal incident to form that same judgment. Likewise, if something has just happened to you and it's in the same class as something else, then this can impact in the significance it plays in your judgment. For example, if you are reading a book about an artist, you're more likely to notice artwork by that artist. There potentially hasn't been an increase in that artist's artwork being present. It's just that you now notice it more. Or if something happened to you a week ago, and now you hear that a similar thing has happened to a friend, the recency will impact your judgment on how common you think that thing is. These recent occurrences are more available to you than earlier occurrences. It's common to think that the probability of things we've seen or experienced happening recently are more likely to happen again soon compared to things we haven't seen or experienced recently. Another availability heuristic option is illusory correlation, where there's a bias in our judgment of something based on assuming a correlation is a causation. Often when two things that aren't connected occur near each other and are memorable or emotionally charged, and so the person assumes a link between the two which doesn't actually exist. It could be, for example, that someone claims drinking orange juice boosts brain power and helps you pass exams. Perhaps you find a website where thousands of people share examples of drinking orange juice and passing their exams. So you assume this to be true, despite the thousands of people who perhaps had done the same but failed their exams, or hadn't drunk any orange juice and yet still passed their exams. Maybe your belief is so strong that you sign a petition against the education board when they announce that they're going to ban drinking orange juice and any drinks other than water in the exam room, because you feel that this would be detrimental to students' results. There's a heuristic which is commonly used by salespeople. That's the adjustment and anchoring heuristic. The idea being that people often make estimates by starting from an initial value. This initial value may be a suggestion, or it could be that the person themselves perhaps did a mental calculation to get a starting idea. So it could be that someone's trying to work out how much the groceries in their basket will cost, or they try to work out a discount. How they try to work it out could lead to very different final answers, and these answers may not have any bearing on the truth. For example, someone may round up all of the prices, work out a few items and then guess. Someone else may assign an average price to each item and then guess. For discounts, someone may take a look at a few of the items, perhaps the more expensive items, work out a rough estimate for those items, and then guess the rest. In a study, students were given 5 seconds to guess the answer. One group were shown 8 times 7 times 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. Another group were shown 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5 times 6 times 7 times 8. They had 5 seconds to guess the answer. On average, the first group guessed 512. The second group guessed 2,250. Both of these guesses are wildly inaccurate. The correct answer is 40,320. There have been many replications of studies where if someone is shown an expensive item and asked to value the next item, they value it higher. If they're shown a cheap item and asked to value the next item, they value it lower. It's common for retailers to show an overinflated list price so that the reduced price seems like more of a bargain. Or a brand perhaps has status, and so you snap the item up at what you perceive to be such a bargain price, making a decision so quickly that you fail to see the faults which have led to the item being priced so low. Maybe a salesperson suggests a higher price when they know you'll be bartering to increase the chances that you'll settle on the price they actually want. Or if you're savvy at bartering yourself, you go in with a much lower price, devaluing the item you're after, hoping that the salesperson settles on a lower price than they'd planned. Perhaps you find yourself on a very long web page, filled with testimonials and telling you all about the benefits and added extras you'll also get with the digital product and the value of every single one of those extras, often with overinflated prices for each of these extras, like the $200 report, the $500 bonus ebook, the $100 bonus flashcards, the $300 bonus Life Changer self-help audio track, along with the $1,000 product, all for the bargain price of $197. Under these circumstances, more people are likely to see the huge discount from the perceived stated value, so they're more likely to buy. And this could be enhanced further by stating its time-limited offer, or only available to a limited number of people, so they feel under pressure to make a decision, compared to if the product was just honestly listed as all of this for $197. Whether we like it or not, we all respond in these ways at some time or other. Knowledge and taking time to slow down and think can help us make better decisions and hold more accurate judgments in many situations. But these aspects of our being are natural and ingrained into who we are for our survival. It's just that they can crop up but times when that specific mode of thinking isn't helpful. So as you close the pages on this topic, you can stand up from that relaxing chair, place that book back on the shelf. As we leave the library, outside the library, we say our goodbyes as you head home and settle down so comfortably and peacefully in bed, and as your unconscious now absorbs this learning from today, you can drift so deeply and comfortably asleep with each breath you take, sleeping perfectly and soundly asleep all night long.